Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to No Timeouts, a football show coming at you from the Score Studio. My name is Jonah Birnbaum. That is Dan Wilkins. That is Tyler MacKillop. That is Justin Boone. You know them, you love them, and we love our friends over at Enterprise. Big shout out to Enterprise for sponsoring today's episode. Let's get down to business. Gents, in preparation for today's show, I went back through the archives, and on the third episode of No Timeouts, when we were just boys, we were discussing postseason locks for 2024, and Wilkie, you had the audaciousness to anoint the Los Angeles Chargers a postseason lock for 2024, and we, to a man, thought at best you were too optimistic, certainly premature. At worst, you were totally out to lunch. You know, we figured that given the tremendous amount of roster turnover, given the fact that they were operating under a new coaching staff, it would take some time for this Chargers team to coalesce, to find their footing again. My dude, I was wrong. We were wrong. The Chargers are legit. They're 7-3. They're fourth in the NFL in point differential. They've won 4 games in a row now, and they're coming off their most emphatic victory of the season. They did squander a 21-point lead against the Cincinnati Bengals, but they managed to pull out the victory with an 84-yard touchdown drive in the final minute of the fourth quarter. This is a mea culpa on behalf of all of us. We were wrong. You were right. The Chargers are legit, man.
Yeah, I totally understand not believing in the Chargers because I have been burned by them multiple times in the past. I'm always all in on them, and then they always prove me wrong. But I really thought that the arrival of this coaching staff was going to make the difference, and so far, so good. The case that I laid out heading into the season was you had Jesse Minter coming in, taking over that defense. He was bringing that Michigan Ravens-style scheme, and you look at last year, they were bottom 5 in EPA per play. So far this season, they're top 7. And then you have the offense. I totally understand why people do not get excited about a team that wants to build through the trenches and run the ball, but it's not so much about just having those results in the run game as it is creating that foundation around your quarterback. And really, for the first time in his career, I would say this is what Justin Herbert now has. He has that run game to lean on. They're starting to open up the pass game, and you're really starting to see that top 5 talent shine through. And I think you would agree, Tyler, you're a Chargers fan. He just looks so much more comfortable now. He's really starting to use his athleticism as a runner. He's just really taking off into that quarterback I think we've both always thought that he could be. And the really exciting thing for me with this team is that they've improved this much already without really being able to do a ton of work on the roster. Last offseason, they had a ton of cap issues, so it was more subtraction than it was addition. They had to trade Keenan Allen. They cut Mike Williams. Of course, they brought in Joel. He's been awesome, but that's really all they could add to this roster. Looking ahead to next offseason, they've got $75 million in cap space. They're going to be able to go out, get some more weapons for Justin Herbert, really upgrade the back end of the defense, and I can't wait to see what this team looks like at that point. So I think we're in the early stages of Jim Harbaugh building another elite program, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like down the road.
I think it's been such an interesting season too, because a lot of the preseason takes about them were right initially. They came out, they were running the ball a ton, and it was like, oh no, they're going to be this kind of old school offense. And then they've managed to transform into more of a passing attack. And it's just kudos to the coaches there, to Harbaugh. And we're going to talk a lot about coaches today. Mm-hmm. I think Harbaugh's doing an outstanding job, not just hiring good coordinators and making sure that the offense, expands like it is, but also motivating these guys, right? Every single chance he gets, he's talking up Justin Herbert. One week it's, he's a really good quarterback. The next week he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He's building his confidence, and he's turning Herbert, who I think might be a little bit of like a quieter personality, into maybe someone that can really lead and have a voice in that locker room. And it's awesome to see.
And I also think it's funny because a few weeks ago, we were bemoaning the state of the weapons that Justin Herbert had to work with. And I don't think we anticipated Ladd McConkey developing at the rate he has, because this season, overall, he's been really impressive. But over the last month and a half, he's been absolutely exceptional. He's actually third among rookies right now in receiving yards. He's ahead of Malik Neighbors. He's ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., and he kind of reminds me a little bit of Cooper Kupp out there. Like, he's lining up in the slot 70% of the time. He's running exceptional routes, and when he gets thrown the ball, he's making plays, man. He's got 9.8 average yards per target right now. That's ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yeah. That's ahead of Tyreek Hill. Like, he has really come along, and I think we need to recognize that, that group of weapons in the passing game that we were kind of complaining about earlier in the season, it feels like it's a different group now, given how McConkey has taken a step forward.
Yeah, and my point about looking ahead to next season in the cap situation, you just look at how much better that could get from here.
Oh, yeah.
look ahead to free agency, they could go out and sign T. Higgins to go with Ladd McConkey, and you look at how amazing that offensive nucleus could be at that point. I'm very excited about this team.
Well, the only thing that I do want to say though is the Chargers still could Charger, and a lot of things can happen over the course of a season, right? We could get to the playoffs and still have one of those like heartbreaking defeats. So,
but I think this past week was like kind of a sign, right? Like it was falling apart.
It's the kind of game that they would lose, right?
Yeah.
You're like, now we're kind of past that. At least you hope.
Well, we say that, and
Tyler hopes.
We say that, but now they have another like really big test going against the Ravens on Monday.
Yeah, that game's gonna be awesome.
And so far, I mean, look, I think this whole conversation is the kiss of death, and now we're consigning them to a certain fate.
Might miss the playoffs now.
Well, and that's the thing is that their schedule so far has been very easy, right? Yep. They haven't played a ton of good teams. This is going to be a real test. Having said that, though, going from the last 4 seasons being 21st in the league or worst in points allowed per game to first in the league in points per game, points allowed per game, that is an astonishing turnaround that even given the relatively weak schedule needs to be recognized. You really can't say enough about how that team has really transformed in their first season under Harbaugh and with obviously all those incredible coordinators. Now, speaking of Harbaugh, 13 years removed from being named the NFL's Coach of the Year and 3 years removed from being named College Coach of the Year, he has emerged once again as one of the favorites for 2024 NFL Coach of the Year. He's not the betting favorite right now, but he definitely has a case, and I would say that race is more compelling than I certainly usually find it to be, because you have Harbaugh obviously going for number 2. You've got Dan Quinn in his first year back as a head coach. He's making a strong case. You have Mike Tomlin going for somehow, inexplicably, the first Coach of the Year award in his entire NFL career, which seems shocking.
That's insane.
It's nuts. Who do you think is going to win Coach of the Year?
Yeah, you mentioned it. We were talking about it before. The fact that Tomlin hasn't won it, he is the favorite, and there's a laundry list of guys. At first, when I thought about Coach of the Year, I'm like, I got to be looking for a team that came out of the woodwork and won their division. But the last two, both Stefanski last year and Brian Daboll the year before, both didn't win their division and won Coach of the Year. I look at Dan Quinn and Jonathan Gannon as two coaches, defensive minds, that have really elevated the talent on their roster defensively and are both in the conversation to win their divisions. Quinn, I think, is doing a fantastic job generating pressure with a defensive line that doesn't have a lot of talent at all, especially on the edge. They've got Peyton Allen in the middle of their defense, but he is manufacturing defensive playmaking from this team, which I can really commend him for. And obviously, Cliff Kingsbury's done a great job, and that's his job, hiring that spot at coordinator for the offense. And then Gannon's flying under the radar big time. And I think a lot of it comes down to finally getting Kyler Murray healthy. Those two guys are, I think, flying under the radar and maybe don't get the same attention that Mike Tomlin gets. Or how do you guys feel about Dan Campbell? I can't see him winning the award just coming off of this being their second really good year under him. And I guess the way that he manages the team isn't one that has a huge hand in, I guess, decision-making. He likes to take a lot of risk. But I wouldn't see him being a highly considered guy, despite the odds being he's the number 2.
Well, I think that this award, along with a lot of other awards, just comes down to how the voters look at it. And this one historically has always been, which coach surprised us most?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's rarely like who was the best coach in the league. Of course, Bill Belichick could have had a lot more Coach of the Year awards than he did.
Who did the most with the least?
Exactly.
Right?
So I think that Campbell is probably a long shot. I definitely would not be betting on him. Tomlin as the front runner makes a lot of sense because I don't think anyone saw the Steelers doing this, but they've done such a good job putting Russ in a position to be successful. But even just looking at that board right now, I like Sean Payton there. Like what he's done with the Broncos, again, it's probably going to depend on them making the playoffs. Yeah. At this point, they're probably the favorite for that last wild card spot. And he's just done such a good job with Bo Nix, just putting that offense in position where he kind of just has to be the point guard and get it to a bunch of guys who it's really not a great supporting cast, and they've got a productive offense anywhere. So that's got to hold. But I think guys like that are more likely to get the Coach of the Year than guys like Campbell, who came into the year as a Super Bowl favorite.
Yeah. I think I like Quinn and Gannon, but I do think Tomlin. The fact he hasn't gotten one is that narrative piece that probably gives the voters a good thing to chew on.
For sure.
And I would also say that like the fact that the Lions are unequivocally the best team in the NFL despite losing Aiden Hutchinson, like that only bodes well for Campbell's chances. Like I mean he's number 2 on the list for a reason. I wouldn't write him off, even though traditionally it usually goes to a guy who does more with less than Dan Campbell has at his disposal. But staying on the topic of head coaches, in the not-too-distant future, the Dallas Cowboys are going to need a new one. Mike McCarthy is not long for that job because the Cowboys are a dumpster fire. Actually, Des Bryant, Cowboys legend, tweeted earlier this week, if it were up to him, he'd fire everybody. Boone, what do the Dallas Cowboys do now about their head coach?
I mean, we've talked about one candidate a lot here, and that's the Lions offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, right? So he would be an outstanding hire for anybody, but he's going to have a lot of options, I think. And is Dallas going to be the one that he settles on? Sure, there's a lot of things to like about that job. You have Dak Prescott, you have CeeDee Lamb. Let's face it, you're going to have a high pick that you could do something with. They got a few stars on defense. You know, it's a high-profile job, so it could be attractive depending on his personality, but we don't know if he's going to want to take that job and deal with the Joneses and all that sort of stuff. And it's Dallas, so it's not surprising at all that the headlines are going towards names like Bill Belichick and even Deion Sanders, right? Like, it's funny to see, but if you look at Belichick, one of his biggest problems was the personnel side of things, right? So if you put him in Dallas with Jerry Jones there, is that a great combo? Are we going to be able to get the kind of players that you need to build a quality? I don't know. I don't think that would be necessarily a great mix, even though I do still think Belichick probably has something left in the tank at, 72 years old. Belichick, too, seems to be having quite a bit of fun off the field. We're going to leave that alone. We'll see what kind of job he wants. Maybe he wants to just stay in Florida, that sort of thing at his age. So then that leads you to Deion Sanders. And we've talked about this on air. We've talked about this off air. I like the kind of coach that Deion is. I think that kind of coach can be successful. The guy who is the motivator, the guy who's kind of like the CEO coach, where he's overseeing everything, he's calling the shots, but he's hiring good coordinators, and he's being sort of the face of the franchise. I think Deion could do that. I think he could do it well at the NFL level. It would require him to go out and get some good coordinators, and we've seen him do that in college. He's been able to attract guys like that. I think he would be really good for attracting free agents to Dallas as well, because all of a sudden they would have that swagger back. They would be this kind of fun team. Whether it works long term, I don't know for sure, but I think it would be a thing that if I was the Cowboys and I can't get Ben Johnson, I would look to a guy like him.
I want to mince words here because I don't want to say something that I shouldn't. I look at Jerry Jones being the GM and owner of this team. I mean, Mike McCarthy's a puppet. Like, Jason Garrett was a puppet.
Yep.
That is my biggest concern. I like Deion as a fit in the NFL. I just don't know if those two guys can work together because Deion's going to want some control, just like Mike Vrabel was out of Tennessee because he wanted more control. Jerry's not going to give you control. Like, Jerry's not letting Trey Lance play because he's scared that Trey Lance might look anything like Dak Prescott looks, who he gave $60 million a year. I mean, Cooper Rush is like 31. I don't know why Cooper Rush is still playing in a team that's in a lost season. It's because Mike McCarthy doesn't have any real decision power. That's the biggest concern for whoever's going to be their coaches. How much power will they have?
Is Deion taking a job where he can't draft Shedeur? And if he goes to Dallas, are we suddenly talking about the Cowboys drafting Shedeur and getting rid of Dak Prescott?
Yeah, no. Ashton Genty's the like every mock draft in the world.
Right.
Ashton Genty.
I don't see Deion taking a job where he's not able to coach Shedeur. I don't see him taking a job regardless. I don't see the NFL as a fit for him. I don't think professional athletes would be cool with the head coach having theme music as he introduces himself to the locker room. It's just a different vibe for me, and I said it to you guys pre-show. Even if he is in a situation where he's coaching Shedeur Sanders, you're setting yourselves up for a disaster where if you want to fire the coach, well, suddenly that coach you just kicked out the door is probably trying to take his son, the quarterback, with him. Or if it's the inverse, you don't want to keep the quarterback, well, the coach isn't going to want to stick around because you're getting rid of his son, the quarterback. So, yeah, I don't think it's a great situation for Deion. I don't think any head coaching situation in the NFL would be great for him. If I could make a prediction about the Cowboys, though, I would say that they are probably going to hire Steve Spagnuolo.
Really?
I know we're going to head into the coaching cycle
so
tying a ton of big names to them, all the highest paid guys. The reality is Jerry Jones does not like spending money on his head coaches. He doesn't like firing guys before the end of their contract because he doesn't like paying them to not be their coach. He doesn't believe in doing that. So while Ben Johnson makes sense, I don't think he's going to pay Ben Johnson $15+ million a year. He likes the guys who have experience. He likes guys who aren't going to make a ton of money. Steve Spagnuolo has experience. It would be a splashy hire in some way just because he's been one of the best defensive coordinators in the league for a long time. Maybe the Chiefs are going to be coming off another Super Bowl win. I think that could probably satisfy what they're looking for and the kind of guy that wouldn't want to take too much control away from them. But
Steve could be a puppet.
I think we all agree that it wouldn't be the most spectacular hire, but having said that, I think it could also be a good one because I think at this point Spagnuolo deserves another shot.
Yeah.
Okay. you've set the table here, so let's formally open up this topic a little bit more. This is Take the Wheel, presented by Enterprise. Boone, a few weeks ago, you predicted that at least 5 head coaches would lose their job over the course of the season's second half. I see no reason to believe that you were not bang on about that, Mike McCarthy being one of the most obvious candidates. Gents, obviously Wilkins already shared one prematurely, but who are some of the guys around the league right now that you feel would be really good head coaching candidates and guys, that you would be pounding the table for to get one of those forthcoming vacancies? And the caveat here is you can't mention Ben Johnson because we've talked about him so exhaustively on the show, and you can't mention Deion Sanders because obviously we've covered that already. So, Wilkie, you've already said Spags would be one. I bet you have a second one in the holster.
Yeah, I'm going to reserve the right to take this back if his offense falls off down the stretch, but for the time being, I'm going to go with Cliff Kingsbury. I know Jaden Daniels gets a lot of credit for what's going on in Washington, and deservedly so. He's been awesome, but Cliff Kingsbury's offense is doing an incredible job of putting him in a position to succeed. You go back to this past offseason, how were we all looking at what the Commanders were looking like on offense? We were very concerned about the state of the offensive line. We thought that was going to be a huge issue. Cliff Kingsbury has schemed it up in a way where he gets the ball out of his quarterback's hands, and they have, I believe, the 8th lowest pressure rate in the NFL right now. And he's also schemed up a run game that is second in EPA per play, only behind the Eagles. He's just doing such a good job with that offense. And again, we've seen it before with the Cardinals, only to fall off. So I do want to see him maintain that down the stretch before I'm fully banging the table for him and fully saying that I believe that he has grown as a coach since his experience with the Cardinals. And I totally get why some people don't like hiring guys who have failed in previous stops. It makes sense, but for me, there's something to be said for having that experience and being able to learn from it and grow from it. And especially when you're in a case like Kingsbury, where I think he was probably made a head coach before he was ready. So I'm leaving the door open for the possibility that I'm going to be all in on him as a head coaching candidate. And I think that teams are going to be looking at what he's done with Jaden Daniels. If you're in a position to draft a quarterback next year, you might be thinking that he could replicate that with your team. And I think that they might be right about that.
I don't disagree that Kingsbury will get a job. But, man, he is not the guy that I would hire. I think we're already seeing that offense fall off a little bit. And maybe it's because Jaden Daniels hurt his ribs and he's not able to run the ball as much. But we've seen it now for a couple weeks where I think defenses are starting to figure them out. And you referenced it. The same thing happened in Arizona. Yep. And Kingsbury, to me, I want to hire somebody that I think could be a leader of men. I don't feel like he carries himself that way. To me, he seems a bit like a fake sharp. He seems like he's got it together, but I don't think he's great at making adjustments. I think he comes into the season with a good plan, and then as the year goes along, defensive coordinators start to figure him out. So I worry that even if he does get hired, and I do believe he will get hired somewhere, I don't think it's going to work out for him.
I will caution that the drop-off that you're going to see in numbers, a lot of that is going to be heavily weighted by what happened last week against the Eagles. And the matchup with the Eagles was just, they have an overwhelming talent advantage. Like, the Eagles defense has taken off. They bullied the Commanders offense all game. Cold weather game. Jaden Daniels has been banged up. I'm willing to throw that one out. I want to see how they go the rest of the way. They've got a couple games against the Cowboys. I think they play the Giants again.
Yeah.
Again, not the best opponents, so it's not the best barometer, but I think that'll be a more fair barometer than going up against an Eagles team that they were just outmatched against.
Yeah, they're going from like one end of the spectrum to the other, right? Yeah. They're going from the Eagles to the Cowboys. This is definitely the right week to pick Cliff Kingsbury because, they're going to blow up this week on offense for sure.
I was thinking the same thing you said, and on top of it, Cliff's wasn't a successful coach in college either. He lost his job in college and then came to the NFL because he was working with Mahomes at Texas Tech. I think he's a good offensive coordinator that probably should always continue to be an offensive coordinator. I don't think he's a great fit as a head coach, and I like what you mentioned because he has helped their offense, but I don't know if he's the right guy to take an offense to another level. Like, what he's schemed up has been great for a rookie quarterback. I don't know how
you look at that offense
and
like
level.
What he's doing with one receiver,
one
good receiver,
I do
and
agree.
he's turned Brian Robinson into an incredibly productive running back with what we all thought was a bad offensive line. The way he's schemed up the run game is better than I think he ever did in Arizona. So it just makes me very optimistic for what he can do, especially with a young quarterback. So again, you look like at a team like Vegas. I know if they want to draft Shedeur Sanders, people are going to tie Deion Sanders to them. But I think that Cliff Kingsbury could be the better option there to just kind of like bring a young quarterback in and set him up for success.
But I just think of it as a coordinator, like Cliff Kingsbury being the head coach to
depends
Sanders
who he hires as his defensive coordinator too. That would be a big.
I've seen him linked to the Bears too, and that one scares me. And I know what he's
Yeah.
doing with a rookie quarterback right now, but going over to Caleb, it could have a nice little start. But long term, I worry that would fail, and I'd be worried about Caleb's long term, like dynasty, for example, dynasty fantasy leagues. I'd be worried about Caleb Williams if they hired someone like that.
We're going to talk about Caleb Williams a little bit later in the show. T, who's the head coaching candidate that you want to see hired?
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think Jesse Minter is like one of the most obvious candidates to be hired in the new cycle. And Harbaugh already was asked about it, and he's like, yeah, I expect we're going to be playing against this guy by the time we take the field again next year. So I think it's inevitable. And Minter's turnaround is incredible. You mentioned the Ravens scheme, and he does come from that tree, but he's definitely put his own spin on this thing too. And he has a fifth-round rookie in Cam Hart. If you watched him on Sunday night, he was playing shadow coverage against Jamar Chase, one of the best receivers in the NFL, and holding his own. This is not a super talented defense, and he has them playing to one of the highest levels in the league. Second best in the league on third down, second best in the league in the red zone, best, everyone knows, the best defense in the league in points per game. This is just a slam dunk for everybody. And he's baby-faced. He looks really young, but I don't think he'd be one of the 5 youngest coaches in the league anyways. So
one of the smart teams in the league is going to hire him, just like the Seahawks were the ones to hire Mike McDonald last year.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Boone, who you got?
I'm curious. I'm going to get pushback on this one. I like Mike Vrabel. I think he kind of got a bad rap at the end with the Titans, because you look at what he did initially, 4 straight winning seasons when he got there. Talent-wise, that team wasn't like near the top end of the league. I would say they were sort of an average talent team.
Always outperformed.
Always outperformed, right? You made the playoffs 3 times there. You made the AFC Championship game once. They went in with the number 1 seed one year. Really, really got the most out of his players. And I would say even did a pretty good job as a defensive guy hiring good coordinators, getting some good offensive coordinators like Matt LaFleur, and I know everyone hates the guy, but Arthur Smith was decent as a coordinator when he was with the Titans. Helps when you got somebody like Derrick Henry there. But regardless, I think Vrabel could come in, and going back to what I said about liking a guy that can be that leader of men, and if he can get the right coordinators, I think he could really get the most out of a team, especially if you look at a team with talent. Like, let's say the Bengals, for example, right? They need that personality to come in there and sort of give them that kickstart and try to get the most, so they aren't starting the season off with these bad records and trying to claw their way back. So I really hope that Vrabel gets another chance, because I think he was a pretty good coach. And I think what did him in Tennessee was the mistakes by the general manager in the front office, right? Trading away A.J. Brown. That's when they started to go down. They made some bad moves. So Vrabel, I think, would be a really good hire.
And I had floated the possibility of Zach Taylor potentially losing his job last week, and I don't know that it was received too well on the show, but it sounds like maybe you're coming around. Fellas.
Well, there's a certain team in green that plays in New York. They're banned from being talked about on the show. That's a good fit. That's a culture fit, and I think that's the type of
Wouldn't know. They have teams in New York?
Yeah.
Wouldn't know. All right. Let's can the coach talk for now and talk about the San Francisco 49ers. It's been a tough season for the reigning NFC champs. At 5-5, they've already matched their loss total from a year ago. And I should point out that of their 5 victories, none have come against teams that currently have a winning record. That said, given all the injuries they've endured, it's not entirely surprising. However, T, correct me if I'm wrong, you don't think that these 49ers can ever recapture the form they had in 2023 and 2022, even when they are fully healthy?
Yeah, I think in their current makeup, in terms of the pillars of their roster being Trent Williams, being George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. Trent Williams is 36. Jason Kelce is 37. He's retired. Like, who knows how many more years you have left? I think the big problem with San Francisco has definitely been the fact that, as you put together this great roster, eventually you have to pay these guys, and the depth just isn't quite as good as it used to be. And they haven't done the same job, outside of Brock Purdy, of hitting in the draft. The last three years, they've only had 1 first-round pick, but they've taken some reaches. Boone might remember Tyrion Davis-Price, who they took in like the 2nd round a couple of years ago. These receivers that they've taken, not to say Ricky Pearsall won't be a hit, but they've taken some shots on receivers in those early mid-rounds that haven't really worked out as well. I don't think the roster has as good of depth, and the D-line is just nowhere near as dominant from the days of Rick Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Samson Ebukam was with them as well. They don't have that same depth. They tried to find some pieces. Leonard Floyd's had an all right year with them, but without Nick Bosa, this D-line is nowhere near the same unit if he's not on the field. I was looking at the numbers. He missed a little bit of that Seahawks game with an injury last week. Their sack rate when he is not on the field is 2% compared to just over 8% when he is available. So it's a massive drop-off because they don't have that same talent. And on offense, the missing Brandon Ayuk is just killing this team. I mentioned it last week and dove into the numbers more. Purdy was the best downfield passer in the NFL last season. His completion rate has dropped over 10% on passes at 20-plus air yards because he doesn't have that dynamic downfield threat. Deebo Samuel leads the team in deep targets, and that's just really not his game. We'll see if Ayuk can come back and be that kind of player. I think that the Niners are still a playoff team. Brock Purdy is still playing at a high level, but I think the makeup of this roster and as they are built currently with those core pieces, I think the window is over. But again, they could get back in the draft and plug the holes and find that depth, but it's hard to replicate and do that over and over. And I think that window for San Francisco is unfortunately passed.
Yeah, and here's the problem. They have to pay Purdy.
They do. Years. Yeah.
I've been just waiting for them to like get it going. I've talked about it on the show that it's the 49ers. Of course they're going to figure it out. Now they're getting healthy. Of course they're going to figure it out. The one thing that I don't think I factored in enough is they went to 2 Super Bowls. They didn't win. Yeah. There's a big Super Bowl hangover to try to be like, all right, we're going to get the troops together and we're going to do it all again. Teams like that, it's tough to really be into the regular season when all it is Super Bowl or bust for them at this point. And I think that might be weighing them down a bit too, that they're trying to get through the regular season. And the Chiefs are just the best at this, right? Just finding a way to kind of get it all back together. They add a few pieces and they just keep chugging along. Right now, I think the 49ers are struggling with that.
Isn't there a precedent, though, of some franchise? I don't know which one. They went to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row and lost all 4?
I'm not familiar with this. No, I'm not familiar with this. Yeah,
what necessary?
What happened to them after that?
Yeah, well, as we discussed, there are no NFL franchises in the state of New York. So.
A very young, impressionable version of me was watching those games, becoming a huge fan, not knowing that I was going to have 20-something years of sadness after that following the Bills.
Casual reminder that Boone's old enough to remember those games.
It's true. Scott Norwood was, I don't know, that was he was on your wall growing up as a kid.
I don't know about that, but definitely knew who he was.
Yeah. Anyway, since we're on the subject of disappointing teams out west, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders, or more specifically, one player on the Las Vegas Raiders, Brock Bowers. The rookie tight end has unquestionably been the bright spot for a team that is 2-8 and has the 24th best offense in the league and is going nowhere. Bowers is 10th in the NFL in receiving yards, and that's not among wide receivers, that's not among rookies, that's among everybody, which is astounding, and he's commanding more of his team's targets than any other tight end in the league with at least 10 games played. Wilkie, and you're biased, so we'll take this with a grain of salt, is Brock Bowers already the best tight end in the NFL?
Yeah, I was waiting to drop this take because I did not want to seem like I was just being a homer, but I no longer care. Like, it needs to be said. If you want to tell me that George Kittle is still the best tight end in the league because when you factor in his blocking ability, I'll buy that because I love George Kittle. But if we're just talking about receiving ability, yes, it is Brock Bowers. He is the best in the game already. And I understand how crazy it is to say that about a rookie. You mentioned the receiving yards. I'm going to talk about the catches. Jamar Chase is leading the NFL in catches right now with 73 in 11 games. Brock Bowers is second with 70 in 10 games. It's just insane what he's doing so far as a rookie. And you can tell me that they're just force-feeding him. Yeah, that's a factor, but defenses know this. Defenses know that after the Devonta Adams trade, he's all they have. They're going to him again and again and again every game, and there's nothing they can do about it because he's that good. He is that good of a route runner already. He just gets open, and you factor in the playmaking ability that he has after the catch, which is every bit as good as we saw at Georgia. He's really just a ridiculous weapon. So I know some people don't like taking tight ends super early in the draft, and of course the Raiders have made a habit out of messing up every draft pick they've made over the last 10, 15 years, but Brock Bowers is an absolute home run, and honestly, if the awards weren't so biased to quarterbacks, he'd probably be the Rookie of the Year as well.
Can't believe we're letting you talk about the one bright spot on the Raiders, but that's okay. I don't think this is a spicy take at all. Yeah. I think, yes, like you said, Kittle, the best all-around tight end, but Bowers right there, the best receiving tight end. And I've been thinking about it. I haven't put together my next year rankings. I'll do that fantasy-wise come January. But where is Bowers going to go based on the numbers that he's putting up versus receivers? We've seen when this has happened before, whether it was like a Gronk or a Kelce or some of those tight ends that did put up, top 10 wide receiver numbers. Bowers is going to be like a second-round fantasy pick. Maybe even you can make an argument that he should go in the first round next year.
As long as they're going to take a quarterback, as long as that quarterback doesn't tank his value. But you know what? We talked so much about two receivers today. People are wondering why Carson Beck hasn't had a great year and might not be a first-round pick. It's because Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers are legit.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was researching this and I was trying to poke holes in the argument. I was like, oh, man, he only lines up in the line on like a quarter of his snaps. Well, you know what? That's what Rob Gronkowski did when he was at the height of his powers. And if you can catch like this and make plays like this, it doesn't matter what you do as a blocker, right? It's like, oh, he functions as a wide receiver. Yeah, because no one can guard him.
Exactly. People don't love the value of tight end early in the draft, like I said. But if you're getting like a Travis Kelce type player who's your slot receiver and is that good, like, are you really going to be complaining about that? Come on.
The funny thing is, do you actually think the Raiders planned to take him? Because there was a lot of talk in the draft that they were looking for a quarterback. All the quarterbacks were gone, and they just sort of went, "Oh, he's the top guy on the board," right?
Yeah. I think that they were definitely going to be targeting a quarterback if one fell to them, but it didn't work out that way. But I think that this GM, I'm not a huge Tom Telesco fan, but I think you can agree he's just in the early rounds at least, he's just best player available, and he's good at hitting on those early picks. So it worked out in this case. Far cry from what they did in the John Gruden years, where they just take a third round talent in the first round. So I'll take this any day, and it's going to work out because they're going to get the quarterback pick at the top of next year's draft. So having a guy like this who you can just rely on over the middle of the field, and hopefully they add another receiver, it'll set the new quarterback up for
I just think it's funny. The best thing about the Raiders right now is something that they sort of fell backwards into potentially.
It felt strange at the time.
Yeah.
So
fitting.
strange.
But the Shadur's-Bauer combination is going to be prolific,
Vegas.
man. It's going to be powerful.
with Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, exactly. And Dion just watching from the sidelines with like an angry look on his face. They nailed it. They nailed it at 13 in this past year's draft. Can the same be said about the team that picked first overall? I don't know. The Chicago Bears' first season under Caleb Williams is swiftly going down the toilet. And while that isn't on Williams alone, there is a multitude of issues in Chicago. His play has been inconsistent at best in his first NFL season, while other first-round quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, they've generally speaking impressed. Maybe it's premature to be having this conversation. We're going to have it anyways. Boone, do you think the Bears regret taking Caleb Williams?
I don't think they regret it yet, no. I mean, we look, and you mentioned some of the names there, right? We look at what Jaden Daniels has done, what Bo Nix is doing, even though I still don't think Bo Nix is that great of a quarterback. What Drake May has been doing recently, and I do think Drake May is probably going to be a pretty good NFL quarterback. But I think the biggest problem with the Bears was the offensive coordinator, and they actually addressed that. They got rid of Shane Waldron, and in the first game without him, we saw a little bit better version of this offense, and it's very hard to change on the fly mid-season and sort of get things going and kickstart everything, but we did see a slightly better version of Caleb Williams, and we know the tools are there, right? Like, he still has the physical ability. He needs time in a good offense with a good coordinator. The sad part about it is that's probably not going to happen until next year, right? We're going to need a full off season where he learns a new offense and hits the ground running. I think the biggest problem here was that Bears fans and the Bears probably had too high expectations for a rookie quarterback in the first season. And we did too. Yeah. I think before the season, we talked on the show about they had a good defense. They brought in all these pieces, and that you put this guy in the middle of it, and that they were going to be able to get it done in year one, potentially make the playoffs and all that sort of stuff. So I'm still excited for what Caleb could be. I still think he could be the best quarterback in this class. And I would caution anyone against overreacting on a little over half a season on any of these rookie quarterbacks, because we always bring it up, whether it was the Josh Allens or Herbert or whoever, that people were kind of negative about, and then over time they won everybody back and became really strong quarterbacks. I could see that happen here for sure.
I think what we saw last week kind of says it all, where you make the change at offensive coordinator and all of a sudden Caleb is getting the ball out of his hands in rhythm. When it's not there, he's taking off and scrambling. He's not just sitting in the pocket waiting to get killed by the pass rush. So I think that it kind of describes how bad the situation was under Shane Waldron. I think we already knew that, but this just confirms it. And, they got to make the right hire at head coach, assuming that they move on from Matt Eberflus. They have to get the right system in there, but I still believe in him as the number one quarterback in this draft. Going back to the draft process, I had it ranked Caleb, Drake, and then Jaden. I would stick to that ranking heading into next year. I think
really?
that's still the way it's going to work out, yeah. Again, still love Jaden, but I think that speaks to how much this quarterback class is going to be good at this level.
All right, let's go ahead and just fully relitigate the first round of the 2024 NFL Draft. Maybe it's premature. Oh, well. Which teams, fellas, do you think, if they could, would take back their first-round pick from the 2024 draft? And T, let's go with you first.
Yeah, I had a few in mind, but I think the most intriguing conversation to have is Atlanta, the team that everybody kind of lost their minds over at the draft back in April. This team, I know, you look at Aaron Rodgers and how that's worked out, but getting Kirk was obviously a risk because of the Achilles injury, but it's worked out. I would say Kirk has looked as good, if not better, than you expected him to look coming off of the Achilles injury. And this team is missing one thing, a pass rush. It's the worst in the league by far. It's why they got absolutely dominated by Denver. That offensive line just pushed them around. They thought Matt Judon coming off of the injury was going to be the answer to that hole in the entire roster, really, because I feel like this team is pretty complete. And they've gotten a great performance from Darnell Mooney from free agency, just completely revived his career. But the defense is missing that pass rush. They could really actually have them be a Super Bowl contender. I truly believe that. And Penix, maybe he is the future. Maybe Kirk only lasts 2 years in Atlanta, but they could really use a Jared Verse, who's going to be the defensive rookie of the year, Aliatu Latu with the Colts. I know Dallas Turner isn't having a great year in Minnesota, but these are all pieces that could have been there instead of Penix, coming in while the team's down 30 in
and
the fourth
sitting
quarter.
on the bench for 3 years probably.
Yeah.
Boone, who you got?
I'd say at least 2 years. Jordan Morgan and the Packers. This is way, way, way down the first round, right? It's an offensive lineman. He got hurt in training camp. He was trying to battle for a starting job at that point. He's dealt with a shoulder injury kind of on and off all year long. Now he's looking at going on IR potentially. I haven't seen if they put him on there yet, but it looks like that's going to happen. So yeah, just an unfortunate move. I get why they did it. You're trying to get players in there who can protect your franchise quarterback and help your offense get even further. But you can't tell me that a team like the Packers that has Super Bowl aspirations doesn't wish they had another piece on defense or somebody else in there that could actually help them make that push this year. So I think they got to regret that one, or even potentially trading down and getting more picks because they're generally a franchise that does pretty well with their draft selections.
Morgan was never even a start. Like, he hadn't even been starting at any point. I think he's been just a rotational piece all year as it is, too.
Last up.
I'll admit that this one has the potential to make me look bad, like as soon as this week, but I'm going with Xavier Worthy. We all had the exact same reaction when the Bills traded down with the Chiefs in the first round of the draft. How do you let Patrick Mahomes get the fastest guy in combine history? It just seemed like such a good fit. It just hasn't worked out that way so far. I believe he has 307 yards on the season. He has topped the 50-yard mark twice. The guy that the Bills got after trading down, Keon Coleman, has topped it 4 times, and Ladd McConkey, who we talked about earlier, has doubled Xavier Worthy's receiving production so far. It's still early. I still think it could work out, and you got to think at some point he's going to nail down the finer points of his game, like getting your feet in on the sidelines, like it was a problem this past week.
My gosh.
But it hasn't worked out so far, and you got to think a team that is eyeing a three-peat would have loved to get the kind of production that I think they could have gotten from Keon Coleman or Ladd McConkey or even Xavier Legette. I think this is just a reminder that speed is not everything, and this, either of those guys they could have gotten without having to trade up to get them. So I think this may have been the rare miss from the Chiefs front office.
Here's the only thing I will say. Earlier, you talked about Cliff Kingsbury. I thought it was smart because they're going up against Dallas this week. I think they're going to have a great game. This time around, Xavier Worthy, though I agree with you, they play the Panthers this week. And doesn't that seem like a game where they're going to be like, let's get them going. Let's get them. So yeah. I'd be a little bit scared about this week, that take looking wrong. But for the long term, I totally agree with you.
And the thing is, like, they've had all season practically to get him going, right?
Yeah.
No Rashee Rice from early in the season onwards. Yeah. No Hollywood Brown for the entire year. Like, the pathway, the opportunity was there for him, and it just really hasn't clicked, which has got to be troubling.
I don't think Xavier Worthy is the type of player, he's never proved at the college level, I don't think he will at the NFL level, to be a dominant number one in the offense. He's supposed to be a field stretcher. He's kind of supposed to be a Jameson Williams type that crushes man coverage. He hasn't been doing that at all this year. He doesn't have the spatial, like the awareness on these minute details that the Chiefs really need from him. I don't see it working out, and it looks really silly in a year where they took, 7 receivers went in the first round. There's other positions that they could have addressed. Not to say that there's a glaring need for the Chiefs, but I don't think Worthy will ever be the guy that they expected him to be.
The Chiefs are getting back Isaiah Pacheco soon, potentially this week, so that's a nice little addition for them. And Hollywood Brown, Hollywood Brown had like a cryptic tweet of like a clock. Maybe it's time. Maybe he'll be back at some point sooner than we thought. So they're still going to get reinforcements, man. The Chiefs, they just keep coming.
The telltale sign for me is that someone in my fantasy league picked up Hollywood Brown this week. So you know that Hollywood's return is forthcoming. Gentlemen, great stuff. There's only one thing left to do. You know what time it is. It's trivia time. Here we go. Jamar Chase, the NFL's leading receiver, made history earlier this year when he became the first player in NFL history with multiple career games of 260 or more receiving yards. Can you name the 12 other players in the last 30 years to rack up 260 or more receiving yards in a game?
Wow.
I'll give it to you one more time. Jamar Chase, the NFL's leading receiver, made history earlier this year when he became the first player in league history with multiple career games of 260 or more receiving yards. Can you name the 12 other players in the last 30 years to rack up 260 or more receiving yards in a game?
Oh, single game, not twice.
Nope. They just did it once.
Okay.
Look, he's the only player in history who's done it twice.
Yeah,
no one has more than one.
Right. Sorry,
so, yes, they only had to do it once, one banger of a game with 260 or more receiving yards. T, you're up first.
I can't wait to hear the weird ones you're going to tell me at the end. I'll go Jerry Rice.
Correct. He did it in 1995.
Who's next?
Me?
Yeah, Wilkie, let's go with you.
Julio Jones.
Correct. He did it in 2016. He had 300 receiving yards in week 4 of the 2016 campaign.
Megatron.
Correct. He did it in 2013 with 329 receiving yards. That's the second highest total in NFL single game history.
Randy Moss.
Sorry to see you go, my friend. Randy Moss, not on the list. 2-horse race.
Unbelievable.
It might be one soon. I
have a lot. I had a lot in my head.
Oh, you know what? Flipper Anderson. No?
So he holds the single game record for receiving yards. He didn't do it in the last 30 years.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, my God.
You hate to see it.
You got to give me credit for knowing that. It's okay.
I'm thinking about allowing you to remain in the game. But let's see what Boone says here.
Before I answer, I will say that if I get this wrong, because of where we started, there is no winner this week. But last week, I technically did win, though you didn't give me the win.
You did technically win last week.
Tyreek Hill.
Correct. He did it in 2020. He had 269 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns week 12 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Boone, you are the champion. Fellas, you left a lot of meat on that bone.
Is Terrell Owens on the list?
I was going to say he was the other one.
Terrell Owens is on the list.
That was the other one I had.
That was going to be my next one. I thought Flipper Anderson was the layup because he's got the record.
Antonio Brown on the list?
Antonio Brown is on the list.
That's a good one.
Where were you?
Him.
Where was Antonio Brown 5 minutes
Has
ago?
Justin Jefferson done it?
No JJ. No JJ. Here are the other ones you guys missed. Amari Cooper did it in 2023 with Cleveland. Josh Gordon did it in 2013.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Andre Johnson did it in 2012.
Okay.
Chad Johnson, a.k.a. Chad Ochocinco, 2006. Lee Evans, 2006. And Jimmy Smith in 2000.
Nice.
How about that?
All right.
Anyways,
Josh Gordon. Nice.
solid effort. Not your finest hour, but some nice pulls there.
I maintain that I could have kept going if I got credit for Flipper
What
Anderson.
year?
but-
Hold on. This is unscripted. I just want to see what year Flipper Anderson did. I think it was in the late
1875?
80s. Yeah, exactly. He was the only receiver on the field. When did he do it? He did it in 89. 89. So you missed it by about 5 years, a half decade. But I like where your head was at. Anyways, that'll do it for today's episode of No Timeouts. Once again, big thanks to our friends over at Enterprise for sponsoring today's episode. One more time, that is Justin Boone. That is Tyler MacKillop. That is Dan Wilkins. My name is Jonah Birnbaum. We'll see you next time.